to the Sugar Plum Robin Knitting Podcast. My name's Ray and I'm going to chat to you today about some knitting. I'm sat out in the garden today because it's a little bit sunnier and I want to take advantage of every moment of sunlight that I can get because I live in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and the sunlight isn't always so predictable at this time of year. So apologies if the light level is fluctuating and it's making things look strange. I hope that it's okay. So I think today will be a little bit of a shorter episode. I'm just going to chat through one main finished object that I finished, and I have a kind of topic to talk about today which I thought might be fun to kind of open up as a bit of a discussion. So as always, I start and end every episode with a poem because I'm a poet and I love poetry. Today I was thinking I'm going to talk a little bit about knitting when you have chronic health conditions. Apologies if there's background noise, there's a road nearby and it's a little loud today. I'm going to talk about knitting with chronic health conditions. So I thought I would read a poem from this book, 163 Days by Hannah Hodgson, who is a disabled poet who writes really beautifully about living with chronic illness and disability. So this poem is called Dancing with a Doctor. She tried to dance with me until I fainted. I saw it then, the medical flickering, making her face a lighter. She remembers my body as a candlestick, that I'm nearly spent, and she tries to scrape the wax of me off the windowsill. Others gather, of course they do. The medical is contagious. They know the heat I'm exuding, heat that can't be stopped from rising. Tonight, I want them to forget I'm a cardiac arrhythmia, forget I'm a venous system, forget I'm necrotic tissue. Tonight, I am sequins. I'm a lost clutch bag. I'm a pay-as-you-go mobile. These items don't need a doctor. All I need is a full-fat Coke and maybe a vodka. I need forgetting, a loss of the conscious medical. I need her to be a clueless civilian, questioning if smelling salts work, if she should raise my legs, if she should call for an ambulance. She shouldn't search for my carotid, for the stitching of my heart. Tonight, she must remember I am sequins. Yes, a pulse, and she makes it quicken. So I think Hannah's poems are really beautiful, and I hope you really enjoy it. It's all her poems are so lovely, and I think it's definitely worth picking up this book if you can. 163 Days by Hannah Hodgson, and I'll put a link to this or the name of it, and as well as the name of the patterns and the yarns and stuff in the description box as usual. So let's start with what I am wearing. I am wearing my Chanterelle top, which is a pattern by the lovely Kia from Kia's Bod, who you know I'm a big fan of, and I talk about her and her knitting a lot, and her podcast. She has a podcast here on YouTube which is one of my favourites, and I definitely recommend you watch it. So it's a little bee. So this top is lovely and summery, and I'm really enjoying getting the chance to wear it because the weather is not often nice enough for it. It is knit in a fingering weight yarn. I used a combination of the kind of aqua coloured one with all the multicoloured speckles is from Bird Street Yarns. It's a hand-dyed sock yarn, and I used about 1.5 skeins of it, and then the brownish hazily coloured yarn is, what is it? I can't remember. I'll put it in the description. Can't remember the name of it now, but just it's a more kind of commercial 4-ply yarn, but still really nice. And so this is a really nice pattern. It's on Kia's website for free. It's more of a kind of a recipe than a pattern. It's just you kind of have to adapt it to your own size. You start at the top, and I did some short rows, although the pattern doesn't have them, I just added some in, and you knit down in these stripes, these 2x2 stripes. You do a raglan shaping, you split for the sleeves when you're happy with the size, unit down. It's got this, I'll stand up a bit so you can see, it's got this lovely band of colour work here, and then the lace going down, and you just knit it until you're happy with the length, and then this twisted rib here on the sleeves. So yeah, this is a really nice top for me, and it makes me feel really happy when I get to wear it, so I'm very happy today. Okay, so I'm going to show you my one and only finished object, and I really wanted to do a quick podcast today because I'm going to give this finished object away to a friend later this afternoon, so I wanted to show it to you first. And it is my finished green tea shawl. Just here. It's just finished blocking. I just took it off the blocking mats this morning, so here she is in all her glory. This is a really lovely pattern. I'm hoping you can see it. It's hard to get the whole thing in. It's kind of a crescent shape with these bits that come up at the end. I hope that's showing up okay for you. You can see the lovely colours of it. And I mentioned this in my last episode as well, but it's been a really quick knit, and it's just been really addicting. I've been knitting on it non-stop because it's so peaceful, the pattern's easy to memorize, and these little leaves that show up in the lace are just so beautiful. It's lovely to watch them unfold. And as always with lace, it really came into its own when I blocked it. It was much smaller before blocking, and it's just opened out beautifully. So yeah, this is the Green Tea Shawl by Mia Rind. It's a really nice pattern. The shawl isn't too big, but you can make it bigger by just adding more repeats before you do the ending, the finish. There's like a series of charts, and you can just repeat, and she explains it all very clearly in the pattern. It is knit in a double knitting weight yarn, so this is a double knitting weight yarn. I said in my last episode I can't actually remember who made it, and I've lost the label, but it was a gift from a friend who had it custom dyed for me in these colours, to make her think of the beech tree which we often meet under in the woods. So this is why I chose the pattern of leaves to go with it, because I wanted to think about the beech tree and the leaves. It's really lovely. I'm going to put it on around my shoulders so you can see. It's a really nice size, I think, to just wrap around the shoulders, and it's lovely and warm, and I'm in love with this colour. And the pattern, like I said, it was lovely. I can't recommend it highly enough, actually. It was a beautiful pattern to be working on. I think shawls are a really nice summer project because they're not too heavy to drag around with you and work on, and this one is a really lovely summery pattern. It just looks like the summer sunlight through the trees, and yeah, everything about it is making me very happy at the moment. So I've been working on it almost exclusively as I've needed a little bit of happy. Yeah, this is my finished object, which is the green tea shawl. I'm going to keep it on because it's lovely, and it doesn't ever get really that hot in Scotland that you would be too hot with a shawl on. So I have a bunch of works in progress which I've shown you in the previous episodes, and none of them have made significant progress, like a little bit, but not so much that you could see a huge amount of difference. But I have a new cast on. I know that it's June, but prepare yourself for this because it's a Christmas project. This is, I was going to say it's not me being really organised, but I suppose it is in a way. I have a little Etsy shop. I'm Sugar Plum Robin on Etsy and on Instagram, but I have a little Etsy shop in which I predominantly sell Christmas stockings. And what people do is they send me, they say, oh, my child likes dinosaurs and the colour blue, and I design them a stocking and send them the chart, the colourwork chart, and once they're happy with it, I knit it up for them. And I already have about 20 orders for this coming Christmas, and I'm just starting to slightly already feel the panic. So I thought what I'll do is I'll just knit a few of them now so that I'm less panicked about it. So I have one that I'm working on. I just cast it on yesterday. I can show you. So this, this is for a little boy called Theo, who loves dinosaurs in the colour blue and green. So this is just the very top bit of the stocking. You can see it's got his name, Theo, which might be backwards for you actually, and just the very top of the dinosaur, which is looking a little bit all over the place and puckery at the moment because it's knit with a mix of stranded knitting for the blue and intarsia for the green, and when it gets down to the dinosaur's body I'll just be doing stranded colour work for all 3 colours, and I'll just do 3 colours in a row colour work, but I wanted to limit that as much as possible, so I'm doing intarsia, and I'm doing intarsia in the round, which is why it looks so messy and so puckery, because I have to thread the green back each row. But the good thing about these stockings is they're acrylic, because first of all it's inexpensive, second of all most of these are going to people who are not knitters and they're not going to be hand washing them, and they might get chocolate melted into them and all sorts. So what I'm going to do when it's done is what I usually do. I chuck them in the washing machine on a gentle cycle, and by the time they come out all the stitches will have evened up nicely. So yeah, Christmas stocking in June. It made me laugh, so I thought I would share that with you, that I'm already making Christmas things. I just really hate stress, and so I want to get really ahead of it this year. So I'm only going to talk about this finished object and that work in progress, which is about done now. So I just thought I would talk a little bit about knitting and chronic illness or disability. So I've spoken a little bit before about how I have a chronic pain condition, and I'm not sure how much I've spoken about it here or how much I've really talked about it, so I thought now might be a time to talk about it. I have a mix of health problems, some of which are diagnosed and some of which are still a little bit of a mystery, which is fun. But the ones that mostly affect my knitting are that I've been diagnosed with hypermobility, which is kind of a connective tissue disorder, which means that I get a lot of pain in my joints. And I also have a type of arthritis in my back, in my spine, which causes me a lot of pain in my lower back and my pelvis. So those are my main two things that affect my knitting. And I get a lot of fatigue when I have pain, when my pain levels are high, and it can also make me feel really easily overwhelmed because my body's already kind of overstimulated by the pain and the achiness, and then anything else is too much, like even bright lights or music is just too much. So that gives you a bit of info just of where I'm coming from with my issues of my knitting. So the way that affects my knitting is that sometimes I get joint pain in my wrists, my fingers, my elbows and my shoulders, to the point where I can't knit, and sometimes sitting and hunching over my knitting exacerbates my lower back problems. So I have to be really careful with all of those things. And I think I'm not alone. I think that lots of people have problems with chronic illness, chronic pain, and they enjoy knitting. And I think partly that can be because, I can't really, especially when the pain is bad, climb up a mountain or go mountain biking or skydiving or whatever. I can't do a lot of very active things. I do like walking, and I do try and keep active to support my joints. My muscles have to be kept strong, so I do a lot of swimming and exercise that supports my joints. But often I'm just having to sit down a bunch, and that means knitting. And I think I'd go a bit mad without knitting. I think that when the pain is bad, I just need something to focus on often that will take my mind away from how my body's feeling. And knitting can be a great distraction. However, there are times when the pain is too much to knit, or when the knitting is exacerbating the pain. I don't know if any of you find this, if any of you have chronic illness or chronic conditions and you find that sometimes knitting can exacerbate them. I'd be really interested to hear from you and what you do to work around that, or what you do when your pain is flaring up. It's been a really hard lesson for me that I can't push myself through it because it just makes it worse. And sometimes I have to take a break from the knitting, which is horrendous for me actually, because often when the pain is bad, that's what I want to do. I want to knit to take my mind off it, and then I can't knit because the knitting is causing more pain. So then at those times I thought I would share what I do. At those times I think about knitting. I know that sounds silly, but I go and I plan all my knits, and I do all my dream knitting. What am I going to make? And I'll maybe even go and get out all my stash and organise it and look at it and think, I'm going to make this into this and that into that. And I'll scroll through patterns. Sometimes all I can do is lie down propped with pillows all around me in my bed. And sometimes I'm on really strong painkillers, which can make me nauseous, and all I can do is just sort of lie reclined and hope that it passes. And at those times I like to go on my phone and look at different patterns, and or look on Instagram and see what other people are making. Often at those times I'm so overwhelmed that I can't even like text or talk to people online, and sometimes comments go unanswered for a long time because I just can't even muster the kind of focus and concentration to type to people, which is hard to then explain, and I don't want to be ever rude. I'm never ignoring your comments because I'm being rude. It's often just because it's a little overwhelming and I'm in, you know, a bad flare-up or something. So yeah, I go and look and I plan all my projects, and I make endless lists upon lists in my phone, lists on paper of all the things I'm going to do, or I dream up projects that I'd like to design and I imagine them. And it might be that they never come to pass, or I never do actually knit that project that I'm planning, but just the time thinking about it and planning it has sort of scratched that itch of knitting that when I'm not able to knit. So sometimes I find also particular kinds of knitting are more exacerbating than others. And there's been a few things that have helped me with that, so I thought I'd run through some of those as well. One thing that's really helped has been switching to circular needles for just about everything, even if I'm knitting flat. And that's because the long needles, it's kind of a physics thing, isn't it? There's sort of like a lever, and you're far further away. The weight of the knitting is further from the fulcrum, and basically with the long straight needles with a lot of knitting on, the weight is a lot, and you're trying to hold them, and it puts a lot of strain on your wrists. Whereas if it's on the cable of a circular needle, mostly it's resting in your lap, and in any way it's more distributed towards the center of gravity is not so far out, and it's a lot better on the wrists. Some people find that wooden or bamboo needles are better for their hands and their wrists, and I think the difference for me is really slight. I don't know if I'm just imagining it or not. I think it is maybe slightly better, but I tend to mostly use aluminium needles just because those are what I have. I think lightweight needles is the key thing, as light as possible, so you're putting less strain on yourself. One of the very worst things is when I'm knitting at a super tight gauge. My gauge is always really loose, and I think partly that's because that's the way that is more comfortable for me, for my hands and my elbows, and I get actually a lot of pain in my shoulders as well with knitting. And so when I'm knitting things at a really tight gauge, I find that quite difficult, and I have to often take regular breaks. I don't actually have so much of a problem on knitting on really thick needles, and these stockings that I do are knit on 7mm needles, and I hold the double knitting acrylic double, so that it's thick enough. There's the inside. I always like to see the inside of colourwork. And so I do use thick needles without too much of a problem, thin needles without too much of a problem. More it's about whether the yarn is suited to the needles, whether it's at kind of a quite normal, gentle gauge, because then it's not putting too much pressure and strain on the wrists. I don't know if that will help you, but that's what helps me. So if I have a project, it's our little friendly neighbour dog. So if I have a project where I have to knit it at a very tight gauge, what I tend to do is I just do it in small amounts, and I try and rest my arms on pillows as I'm doing it, and just do a little bit at a time, which makes those projects last for a long time. But it does help. Which brings me on to my next thing, which is maybe a little more controversial, but one of the main things that I do to kind of regulate my body around my knitting is that I'm not a monogamous knitter. I have many different projects, well, usually 3 or 4 different projects on the go at any one time, and they're different types of projects, That means that if I've been knitting for a long time with one type of needle or one type of yarn, I can switch up and have a bit of a break and use a different type of needle and yarn, and changing as suits my hands, my shoulders, is really helpful. Sometimes I sublux my shoulders, especially this shoulder, and that means like I basically kind of partially dislocate it, and for a while afterwards it can be really sore, really tender, and sometimes I can't really move it very much or move my neck very much. At those times I prop myself, and one thing that I really like for my knitting is putting a rolled up towel or something to support my lower back, and then lean back, and then something for me to rest my elbow on, and then I knit, and I try and move this arm as little as possible with my knitting. So even when my shoulders really hurt, I can work on certain projects, usually lighter projects. Things like shawls are really good. I find that smaller circumference knitting is harder for my hands. So things like socks and sleeves are harder for my hands and my wrists and my shoulder. Whereas the longer circumference knitting is better but often heavier. The weight of the knitting is often heavier, so that's something to be aware of as well. So yeah, that was a bit of a ramble just about me and my body and my ways of kind of navigating through knitting with this body. One of the things I actually find is that sewing is way worse for my back than knitting is, and I'm not completely sure why. I think sewing, especially with the bit where I'm like cutting the pattern out or laying it all down and pinning, and I'm often bent over more, and it's my lower back that really struggles. And when I'm sat at the sewing machine, I've yet to find a really good position for my lower back, and often a sewing day means a pain day the next day. So anybody who sews and has problems, especially with their back, I would love to hear the way you manage that, if you have any tips. So yeah, that was my kind of covering my chronic illness, chronic pain and knitting, and I hope that some of that was interesting for you. I don't know if it was or if it wasn't, but it's something that I don't really speak about so much, but it's so much part of my life and my knitting, I don't even really think about it anymore. But it occurred to me that probably this is something that affects a lot of us, and it's a good thing to talk about it and bring it up and help each other out with any tips and tricks that have helped us. So I'm going to finish up with another poem. This is another shorter episode, but yeah, hold on a second. Okay, this poem is called Planetarium. It's another one by Hannah Hodgson. If you open a camera's exposure, stars are revealed to circle the sky, stirring the night. Their light is sugar in a mug of tea, sugar dissolving and irretrievable. The doctors start with kind science. Sand used to be alive. We build castles with organic matter, the grit of living between our toes. My genes powder under scrutiny. I scrape them into a bucket, but their structures never hold. Turrets have cracks, flagpoles collapse, drawbridges never come down. All doctors ever play with is my ash. So I hope you enjoyed the poems and the talk and the knitting, and I hope that your projects are all going super well, and I will see you very soon. Goodbye.